In elementary school, middle school, we had home ec still. So you had like cooking, you had sewing, so one of the projects was sewing sweatpants, which in my head now is super simple, but if you haven't run a machine or cut so it's just elastic waist sweatpants with elastic cuffs at the bottom. And mine was so terrible, and I could not get to the sweatpant part of it, like putting the two legs together, that the teacher had me cut off one of the legs and sew a stuffed snake. I grew up in a household with brothers, and it was so much fun. We did a lot of camping, a lot of playing outside, a lot of tree climbing, a lot of sports. And neither of my parents necessarily would say that they're artists. And so I wasn't exposed to it. Like the elementary school I went to, we had art class, but it was not, it was pre-done activity. So take the ball, paint it this color, glue it to the cone, add the angel wings and the halo. And so I didn't really explore that side of me at all, or even really, I keep going back and trying to think, like pick out moments from my childhood, like where maybe it reared its little head. And it's hard for me to even find those because we were just busy in sports and fun. And as far as visual arts go, like I don't think I had a huge exposure to that. But then in college, I decided to go to school for stage management, for theater. I did theater in high school, and I was in a state school in Pennsylvania, and I was studying stage management, and I had to take a design class. It was like a basic theatrical design 101. So there was a stage component, a costume component, and one of the things we had to do was sketch the silhouettes for each period into our notebook. I had a fantastic teacher, and she drew the silhouettes, and I started to do it, and it was so easy for me. And it just like, in my mind, I was like, that was really the first time that I think, and this is like, I was 18, or yeah. So I started volunteering in that costume shop that semester. And then eventually I decided I thought that's what I wanted to do, was costumes. So then I left that state school, and my parents, who are wise beyond their years even then, said, why don't you do an internship and see if it's what you really want? So then I did an internship in the costume shop at Pennsylvania Stage Company. And at that point, that's when I started to build a portfolio. And she really taught me, this woman, Audrey, taught me how to cut from a commercial pattern, how to hand sew, how to run a machine, all just kind of the basics. And then I applied to North Carolina School of the Arts. And that's where I went and got my undergrad in costume design. So it's kind of like a long way around. And even visual art. So then I studied theater and costume design. And so that's very much sewing and designing. And for a client, you're always collaborating. It's always a team effort. And I did that for a long time. And then I had my kids and kind of stepped away from it for a little while and just kind of dabbled in it and did a show here and there. And but for my 40th birthday, I was like, I have always wanted to try just the visual art side of it, not the theater design side of it, like visual arts, being a 2D visual artist. And so that is when, that was just 5 years ago, when I was like, I'm going to go for this, and I'm going to become a visual artist and increase that side of me. I started by doing local shows like Panoply and Magic City, and my very first show, I want to say, that I took my art to, and I just remember being so incredibly will anyone even like this? Like, will people think I'm like a total poser? I always struggle with that. Like, I'm just fake. Like, I even think like I'm not really a theater artist because I didn't really do that in high school and I didn't grow up as an artist. So even though I spent 20 years doing it, I'm like, well, I don't know if I would call it's hard, you know, as an artist to go, this is who I am. So the first show that I did with my 2D art, I think, was in Madison, and it was like a dog and cat festival. Like it was like a pet festival. It was like a one day. And I just remember like I had great friends who helped me like set up a booth. I don't even think I had a tent. I think I borrowed my friend Vicky's tent. And like people just showed up with me to like figure out like how do you even do this? And then like getting display stuff and like borrowing easels from people. And I mean, it's just like a little by little by little by little, you know, and then I applied to bigger shows and bigger shows and bigger shows, you know, and then I was like, I remember I was at Montesano and I had finally gotten into Montesano, which was like a big deal for me. And Marcia, who runs the mill, was at Montesano and she was like talking to me and I'm like, I can't believe she's talking to me. This is like local.
Surreal.
Like this is like a moment because I've really wanted to like be part of the art scene here. And she said, well, why don't you apply to the mill? And I was like, well, I don't know if I'm really like an artist that's good enough to be in the mill. And she like pointed at my whole booth. She's like, and she just left. And so I applied. I'm like, okay. So then when I got in there, I was like, I'm like a real artist with a studio. And I mean, it's just so funny, like the moments that you have. And so, yeah. So it's been kind of a slow, meandering journey for me. And so even now, like the 2D and the fiber stuff that I just love is kind of that costume design smashing in with the visual art now. Like, what if it's not just painting? What if it is fiber? What if it's sculptural? You know, which seems so natural if you're outside the story. But like inside the story, I always felt like, well, painting is here and design is here. Yeah, so for me, I don't really think of myself as a teacher, but I think that is how I learned. Like I've always had fantastic people who are good at what they do, who have been kind enough and generous enough with their time and their talents to teach me what they know. And when I was at School of the Arts, North Carolina School of the Arts, the model for it, and I don't know if this is still exactly how they do it, but you started your freshman year and did a term in each of the shops. So you were in the scenic shop. It's a trimester system, and then one in the lighting shop, and then one in the costume shop, and then your sophomore year you started in just in the shop that you were in. When I say shop, I mean you did hours every day working on building the shows. And so you started as a stitcher, and you had a sophomore or a junior who was your first hand above you, and there was a junior or senior who was a draper, and then there was someone who was the student costume shop manager and the student designer, and it ran like a professional costume shop. And so basically a lot of my learning, while I had great classes and great teachers, was from other students. And so the idea of first you're going to learn this, then you'll become a first hand. Well, then you're in charge of stitchers and you have to teach them those things. And so just that idea of like reproducing yourself and teaching the person who's next to you, okay, so you'll learn to stitch, then you become a first hand. Well, then you become a draper. So when you're a draper, now you're running a team and you are teaching the first hands and helping the stitchers. And then you become a designer. And so by the time you were designing, you can make anything you can draw. So just learning that way. So every time I'm in a costume shop, that's kind of how we do it. So, okay, I'm going to teach a few people how to hand sew and have those hand sewing people teach the new people how to hand sew. And so I think that like reproducing your skills and like letting people figure out what they like, and that has just always been part of how I do things. It seems like a natural extension that teaching. And I do love that moment when someone who can't do something, because I had that moment where I couldn't finish my pants. And so when I can show someone how to do something and then they just do it themselves, that is the greatest moment. You're like, okay, here we are. Everybody can do this. That, I love that. And I love when I see people kind of grab onto something that they didn't know existed or didn't know it was as easy as it is, or like making things accessible, because I just didn't have that necessarily growing up. So I'm like, well, let's catch it early. Right. Let's show everyone early. So that's why I love that. I do. I don't know. It's fun. I think there's something to being a generous artist. Like generous with your time, generous with your techniques. Like I think that is, I was lucky enough and still am to have so many artists who have been like, well, I'll show you how to do this. And I know that the art community that I know, the reason I love it is that reason. Because it's like when you have someone who's like, that you admire, or you think what they do is so cool, and then they're like, well, come to my studio, sit with me, I'll show you how. I'm like, what? Like, you're gonna show me how you did this? And so I feel like it's super important to continue to be generous and go, like, I always wonder, like, when people ask me, like, how did you do that? I'm like, should I tell them? Because what if I'm not good at it? Or what if this is the wrong way to do it? Or like, what if I'm not good at it and I'm telling them and they're like, you know what you should really do? Mm-hmm. But then I'm like, you have to just get over that fear and be like, well, this is how I did it. I'm like, so then you could do it this way too. You don't have to do it this way. It could be wrong. Still in my head. But yeah, I love that. I love that kind of sharing, generous spirit that, like, people who really love what they do, I'm like, you just feel it.